Tonight, we are talking about a local Regina building. It started with big dreams and hopes for Saskatchewan, with plans to build thousands upon thousands of cars, only to be shut down and to build weapons instead. And it survived fire, time, and so far a looming demolition. But what if something else still lurks inside? Let's explore the old GMC plant of Regina, where shadows may still be lurking down the hallways. Good evening and welcome back to ParaGhoul Paranormal Discoveries from the Dark. I'm your host, K.D. Culpa, a horror author and paranormal researcher based in Regina, Saskatchewan. Each week on the podcast, we dive into the shadows of Saskatchewan's past and even go beyond, uncovering dark history, mysteries, urban legends, and sometimes we even get to some monsters. If you're one of the listeners that comes back each week but aren't yet subscribed, please hit that follow button and share it with someone who loves the weird and wonderful. I've got more big guests and haunted deep dives coming your way, so join me now as we explore the unknown and bring life to the ghosts and monsters hiding in the dark. Well, welcome to the first official episode of Season 2 of ParaGhoul Paranormal. We're now back every week with new episodes, and I'm excited to say we're starting with a brand new series that I hope to include every month of Season 2, and I can't wait to hear what you think. So today, we're not only launching Season 2 of the podcast and radio show, but also this new special Haunted Saskatchewan Listener Collection series. You may recognize the Haunted Saskatchewan name, as it's been something I've been using for a while now on my website and social media, since this is kind of the series that kind of started me down this path towards, starting this radio show and podcast. So I thought it only fitting to also add a listener collection series on the radio show with the same name, because you know what? It's fun. So, I'm collecting stories from you, our listeners, into themes each month. So that is what the Haunted Saskatchewan Listener Series is, our collection series is all going to be about, so that we can share paranormal, unexplained, and downright eerie experiences from you, our listeners, on the show. If you want to submit your own stories for a chance to be featured in an upcoming episode, then make sure you listen to the end to learn how to do just that. And so tonight, we are featuring, as our first Haunted Saskatchewan Listener Collection series, is actually the old GM Plant or GMC Plant, depending on who you follow or which articles you read about it, which used to actually be the home of 91.3 FM CJTR for years, before the recent move over to the Access Community Radio and the Access building. Now, I've only actually been into the old GMC building once myself, but it definitely has that old vibe of many years and many people traveling through. And let's first talk a little bit about the history behind the building, how it's changed hands over the years, and then we'll get into a couple of unexplained experiences that I've been told about the building, making me wish I had visited more often than just that one time, so that I could perhaps have some experiences myself. Although it was interesting, I guess it could have been an experience, I don't know, but you'll find out shortly here. But first, let's take a step back in time to the late 1920s. Now, imagine you're in June 1928. The prairies are buzzing with promise. Regina is still growing into its role as a major city in the West, as the capital of Saskatchewan. And it's also just recently been chosen by the General Motors of Canada as the site of a brand new automotive plant. Now, you might be asking yourself, why choose Regina? Well, it was central in the Western Canadian provinces. It was connected, and it was full of hard-working people, especially farmers that they felt could work in the plant during the long, cold winters. So they figured that there was a really good employee base here in Regina. And by December of that same year, 1928, the massive 330,000 square foot facility officially opened its doors. It was the largest manufacturing plant in the city. In fact, I think they even said it was the largest industrial site in the city in the newspapers that I read. And it brought with it nearly 1,000 jobs. So you probably, if you try to compare it today, that'd be like a company hiring over 2,000 people today. So this would have been a really big game changer back then. Two architects, William Souter and Gordon Hutton, were brought in from Ontario to design this massive building. And it was really massive news in Regina itself. On the day of its opening, December 11th, 1928, there was actually a 10-page feature on the plant in the Morning Leader newspaper. The first page boasted the heading, "Welcome General Motors," across the top, with images of some of the key management personnel within that big page, as well as a sketch of the plant itself. And if you see it, it's quite a large plant. Like, it was quite massive. The caption within the large image said this: "Regina's big year. 5 months ago came the most important announcement for Reginans since the war. The decision of General Motors of Canada Limited to locate a Western headquarters assembly plant in the capital of Saskatchewan. The announcement meant a giant industry for Regina. It meant the employment of 850 workers. It meant the coming of other industries and other workers. Since that time, a dozen new industries have located in Regina. Nearly 50 factory and warehouse buildings have been constructed here in 1928. Building permits total more than for any 12 months since the cyclone year." Remember, the cyclone was 1912. "And the year has been one of unusual importance to Regina. An important development hinges about the coming of General Motors." So then throughout the Morning Leader on that date, businesses around Regina were welcoming General Motors and their employees to the city and encouraged all of them to visit their stores. I saw some that were about, men's clothing stores, and some were for home stuff. And so everyone was welcoming these employees with money to spend, right? Another article boasted that they were expecting 30,000 Chevrolet and Pontiac cars to be produced within Regina over the next year. Even articles about the Canadian materials that were used to build the plant were boasted throughout the 10-page tribute. So apparently, according to these articles, 250,000 panes of glass were used in construction, as well as enough steel to fill 75 freight cars, another article said, and thousands of Canadian lumber. It was said to be the biggest industrial site in Regina at that time, like I said. So yeah, it was quite a massive building and a massive construction project for Regina at that time. But unfortunately, those good times that Regina and the General Motors building were experiencing after that grand opening didn't get to last very long. So at that time, they didn't realize that just 10 months later, the big stock market of 1929 the stock market crash of 1929 would happen. And the Great Depression would hit, and it would really hit Saskatchewan quite hard compared to many places. So by August of 1930, the plant had to actually shut down and lay off all of its employees. So even though it had, 850 people employed, suddenly 850 people no longer had jobs. Although I don't know if all 850, but you know what I mean. It was quite a big thing. Now, thankfully, it was able to reopen very briefly in 1931. But again, it was only for a few months. and then the lights dimmed in the building again. But eventually, just like everything, there did come a spark of hope in the future. So, in December of 1937, I believe it was on the 17th to be exact, the plant reopened its doors and roared back to life. So, the leader post on December 15th, 1937, had an article saying motor car production underway. And apparently, according to this article, the mayor was inviting all of Regina public and, anyone that wanted to come visit and tour the facility on its official opening day. I guess at that time, General Motors had invested $700,000 to renovate the building to make it more modern, which, if you knew, so it's almost half of what it originally cost to even build the building itself. So I think the original construction was around 1.5 million. And so they're using basically half that amount to renovate and make it more modern. Because apparently in the, what would that be, a few years since it was built, so 1928 to 1936, not even a full 10 years later, there had been enough changes in the automobile manufacturing process or industry that it needed to be renovated and it needed to be updated to be more modern and have the right equipment to actually manufacture automobiles the way they were being manufactured in that day. Now, the reopening itself was a really huge event with 6,500 people coming to tour the plant on reopening day. So, I mean, that's quite massive. So I guess the mayor inviting everyone worked out well. Premier W.J. Patterson apparently flipped a switch to light up a giant neon General Motors sign on that day. And the first car off the line, which was a dark blue Chevrolet, was gifted to the Red Cross. So it would have been a moment of pride, of resilience, and for many families, it also meant survival and, coming back into a better time. In one article that I read, there was one man, Jimmy Dillon, I believe his name was. Apparently, he went from earning $4 a week to then starting out with General Motors and getting $24, after getting hired. So that's a massive change in income. So, I mean, that kind of a change in income could change a person's life and the life of their families. So it would have changed the lives of hundreds, if not thousands of people. Well, I guess not thousands, probably hundreds. But again, unfortunately, the good times were short-lived. Because what did we have coming up? World War II, unfortunately. So with World War II, the plant was taken over by the federal government and was taken on, I believe it was renamed Regina Industries Limited. And it stopped making cars to start producing munition for the war. So things like gun carriages and anti-tank weapons. By 1943, it was the largest munitions plant in Saskatchewan and employed nearly 1,600 people. So again, lots of people getting jobs. So I guess, yay. But it goes to show you the different types of management and different types of things that happened in the building years before CJTR moved in. Now, after the war, there was hope that the plant would return to car production, but the world had changed too much, and manufacturing and distribution of automobiles had evolved too much, apparently. So Regina was no longer seen as the right fit for the Western headquarters. So unfortunately for the General Motors building, the giant, huge plant industrial site that was built and constructed for this very purpose of building cars, never built another car after that. So over the decades, the building has changed hands. It was used by apparently the Department of National Defense. It was used by the government of Saskatchewan. It was used by the city of Regina. And I believe now it gets rented out based on different tenants. So it's like all kinds of tenants have been there. As we talked about, CJTR was one for a while. City departments have been in there. Nonprofits have been in there. There was apparently a virtual reality arcade at one point. I don't think it's still in there. But again, more tragedy, I guess you could say, for a business anyway. Not tragedy for people, but tragedy for a business, happened again in 2017. And this would kind of mark the beginning of the end for the General Motors plant. On a quiet May night, a fire broke out in the west side of the building. Flames apparently lit up the sky with loud bangs echoed through the warehouse district. Fire crews battled the blaze into the next morning. Thankfully, though, no one was hurt. But of course, the damage was done at this point. The building was never quite the same. In 2020, the city officially decommissioned the plant. So not the office building. The General Motors office building is still there. That's where the CJTR radio was for a while. But the actual plant itself was decommissioned and tenants were asked to leave. And now the future of the building hangs in the balance. Apparently, they're doing some environmental studies because they're checking to see about asbestos and any other concerns that might be coming up. So who knows what will happen to the plant and the site in the future. Now, thankfully, the GMC office building itself, so this is where CJTR was in, so it's the actual office building. Again, these tenants are also frequently, there's still different tenants in there. It is currently protected by a heritage designation. So the plant itself could be demolished, but the office building should remain. And it was funny, one of the articles, I can't remember which city official said it, but a quote that I wrote down was, "The historical nature of this building is the story, not the building." And isn't that why we're here tonight, is talking about the story behind the building? That's kind of what brought me into creating ParaGhoul Paranormal to begin with, right? I love the stories behind the buildings. And the story of this building helped shape the city of Regina, in my opinion. And it gave hope during the darkest days of the Depression. It built weapons for the war, which is interesting. I never knew that about the building until I started doing research for it. It probably housed many dreams, many businesses, and maybe, just maybe, it still houses something else. Because buildings like this, they don't just hold history. I think they can hold energy, memories, and maybe even echoes of things that have happened in the past. And maybe some of those echoes are still being heard today. So, of course, now we should talk about the time that this old office building of the GMC plant was actually home of 91.3 FM CJTR. If you're listening to the radio, then that's where you're listening to it now. So that is where our listener stories are coming from today, is from those that have been in the building for 91.3 FM. Although we don't have a lot, I'm sure if we could have polled past radio show hosts or other patrons, other tenants in the building, we probably would have received a lot more. In fact, if you had an eerie experience in the building, please share it on social media and tag at ParaGhoul Paranormal, because I'd love to hear your stories. Now, as I said during the intro, I'm a little sad I've only been in the building once myself. A fellow radio show host through CJTR had asked me to come on for an interview to talk about ghosts, the paranormal, and of course my show. So I had to say yes. At the time, she was using the radio station equipment to record her shows, not like me who has equipment at home. So she always recorded at the station. And when I walked in, I will admit, you do get that instant historic vibe of an old building for sure. And it has that older smell to it. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. I mean, if you know, you know. There's just a certain scent to historic buildings that are nearing 100 years old. There's no denying that they're old when they have that smell. Not saying it's a bad smell, but it kind of reminds me of old books, kind of the same kind of idea, that whole vintage historic smell. I don't know. To me, it's more nostalgic than bad, but let me know what you think. Anyways, I do remember the long, narrow hallway, especially once you reach the radio station portion of the upper floor. And you did get this kind of feeling like you're walking somewhere you weren't supposed to be. I don't know who from the GMC management or employees might have used this portion of the office building, but it definitely feels like not just anyone should be walking around there. It feels like maybe you're going somewhere you're not supposed to. And apparently I'm not the only one that had kind of that vibe of someone like not wanting you there, or maybe just watching over you. Apparently, many that have used that space for recording their shows have felt like they aren't alone, even when they're the only ones in the studio. There's just this sense of a presence being around, no matter what time of day you are standing in the building. And the studio rooms where we recorded at that time that I was there, it definitely felt like there's always people around, like that you weren't, like when you're in the studio, of course, you're behind a closed door. There is a window, so you can kind of see out, but you can't quite see the waiting room or green room or whatever you'd call it. But you just get this feeling that there's people out there, and you expect that when you're going to open the door, there's going to be people standing there. I never actually really got to go look. I was sitting closest to the door, and my gaze kept wanting to go to the window, but from the angle I was sitting, you couldn't see anything anyway. I just assumed there was people wandering around. So, like I said, maybe without knowing it, I actually was having an experience that what some of these others have experienced with, thinking there's people out there waiting and going out to find that the space is empty. I don't know. Maybe I was. Hard to say. Anyway, I know at least one CJTR employee potentially saw who gives this presence in the studio, like gives this feeling of you're being watched. When I asked her about her experience in the building, she said that there was a time when she would think she saw someone standing at the end of the hallway. And to give it some context, I think I already mentioned it. It was a long, narrow hallway. It had doors on both sides. So there were no windows into the hallway. So if all the doors were closed, there was no natural lighting. So you had to rely on the light of the studio, the actual man-made lighting. And I don't know, it just felt weird going down the hallway. I don't know if you ever get those feelings when you're going down a really long hallway with a whole bunch of closed doors and no windows. It just feels weird. You know what I mean? So it is kind of that feeling. So I guess when Joe looked to see who was standing at the end of the hallway, probably it's kind of like, hey, did you need something? Or, hey, are you looking for someone? There would be no one there. The person was just gone, as if they were never there in the first place. And this makes me think of those shadow figures that you commonly hear about in haunted places. The ones that are always standing somewhere at a distance, but you never see them when you're looking at it straight on. They only seem to be visible, kind of in your peripheral vision. It's like they're always trying to play hide and seek on you, but they never actually want you to see them. They only want you to know they're there. I don't know. It gives me kind of chills just thinking about it, as this happens to me all the time when I'm walking around, haunted buildings. Heck, even when I'm in my own house, that sometimes will happen to me. So it's why I love using mirrors in my horror books, because I love that peripheral vision, shadows. I love that in books too. Anyway, but that's not our only spooky occurrence in the building. We have one more to share with you. Okay, so this one takes place late at night, which I imagine would happen quite often because, there are some late night radio show hosts that I believe are live. So if you're going live, you have to be there at the time that your show is, right? And so apparently while working late, Josh heard a window slam shut in a nearby room, making him decide to go investigate to see who else was in the station. Only he couldn't find anyone. He couldn't find anyone in any room where a window would slam. And there's something that makes this story even more intriguing and, well, really spooky if you think about it. And that's the windows. So, what you don't know about the windows in the studio is, I guess years ago, in order to stop people from smoking inside of the building, they decided to nail all of the windows shut. So, that makes you question, if he heard a window slam shut, but they were nailed shut, then where did the sound come from? And who made it? Kind of makes you wonder. And that brings us to the end of tonight's journey into the shadows of the old General Motors of Canada plant. Well, an office building, because you can really only see the office building right now. A place built on automobiles and hope, now echoing with the whispers of the past. From roaring assembly lines to wartime munitions, and now to flickering lights, slamming windows that are nailed shut, and maybe some footsteps in an empty hallway or a shadow figure lurking at the end of the hallway. This building has lived many lives, and I'm sure the office building still has many more to go. But what do you think? Is this just, the creaks of an old building making you feel not quite alone? Or could there be something more there? Now, I'd love to know, have you ever experienced something strange in the warehouse district? Or maybe you've been inside the old General Motors building itself. If either of those cases, I'd love to hear your story. As I mentioned before, you can always tag me at ParaGhoul Paranormal on social media, because I would love to hear your story and to hear what you have to say. Thank you for listening to ParaGhoul Paranormal. If you have a ghost story or an unexplained event that you'd like to share, then make sure you head over to my website at kdkulpa.com and submit your tale today. You might just hear it on our next Haunted Saskatchewan Listener Collection episode. But before you go, I just want to say thank you for being here. Every listen, every share, every bit of support helps me take this podcast further. Interviewing bigger names in the horror and paranormal world, traveling to haunted places, and creating more behind-the-scenes content just for you. So if you haven't already, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with a friend. I'll keep doing my part to make the show something special and spooky and something for you to enjoy. Now stay tuned for more episodes where we uncover more secrets, unravel more mysteries, and dive deeper into the shadows. This is Katie Culpa, signing off. Until next time, my ghouls.